an example of one of these young people who's helping to lead the charge of revolution and transformation. Even in his quietness, he was fearless and had the kind of genteel but bold nature that we don't see much of nowadays. I want to offer condolences. I do offer condolences to his parents, to his siblings, to his entire family, to the community in Britons Hill, and all of South Central who miss him deeply, and we will continue to miss him deeply, to the journalism fraternity, to all of us, to Barbados. We lost someone who would have gone on to great things. Sir, I enter the discussion, the debate on this resolution concerned with Black Lives Matter to first acknowledge the death of George Floyd, who for 8 minutes and 46 seconds was the subject of an extrajudicial killing in the United States. And you know, when these things happen, we start a narrative often about the kind of person that the individual was, how many degrees they had, how well they had done for themselves, how much they represented the best parts of the black population. But the truth is, sir, that none of that matters. And were something like that to ever happen to me, don't talk about my degrees, Mr. Speaker, sir. I don't care what the individual was doing in the moment. I don't care what they were found doing. I don't care how upstanding or not upstanding you deem them to be. There has to be a strong statement that says, we as a nation, we as a civilization, do not allow extrajudicial killings, and as a state, do not sanction them in particular when the act is done to black people. So what you have evolving in the US and in countries around the world is state-sanctioned genocide of the black race. That is what is unfolding before our eyes. And the reason that this moment is so important is not because it has never happened before. It is because a people will not wait forever for justice. It is because that through centuries, after centuries of being shown over and over again that there's no justice for you in a system, people have to stand up and demand justice for themselves. There is always such a moment in any civilization that does not deliver justice to all, and that's what we're seeing happen. The reason it is not just happening in the US, the reason it is resonating around the world, is that we are all reflecting on how well or how poorly we are realizing the mandate of equality in all our countries, in all our regions, in all our communities. We are all reflecting on it. So for those who would say, why march for George Floyd? The march was not and is not just for George Floyd. It is for all of us to take that moment to examine whether we are doing the right thing for the people and the future generations of our society. And often, as happens when the equality discussion comes up, people will hold up tokens. People will say, as happens in the discussion on gender equality, but you have a woman as prime minister, but you have a woman as governor general, but you have women here, there, and so on. And while it is important to acknowledge where strides have been made, It is also important to understand the systemic nature of the inequality which you are seeking to address, so that when individuals or even groups rise to a certain position, that is not enough unless you address the systemic issues that mean that you can't actually predict equal access to resources and to justice. Unless you can reasonably predict that it will happen in every case, you're not yet there. Similarly, there are people who will congratulate us for having the number of women that we have in this honorable place. There are people who will make the point that in Barbados we have black political power, as they would term it. But, sir, black political power for the few means nothing without black economic power for the many. And that is the business that we are here to complete. We've had black political power for decades, and we've started the path and the job and the project of black enfranchisement, especially under previous Barbados Labour Party administrations. I'm sure that colleagues to come will, as others have before me, make reference to that historical trajectory. So I need not do it here in my short intervention, sir. But we're not yet where we need to be. We have not yet completed the journey, and in many ways, we have to now get into the weeds of that project to understand what it means to really deliver economic and social and political enfranchisement. And sir, there is this notion that there's a black political class that has political power, and surely that is a representation of the fact that we have racial equality in this region. But sir, it's interesting how we cast this political power. And you know, I actually reject that expression, political class, because it suggests to me that those of us who work and operate in this honorable place are somehow separate, somehow distinguished from the reality of living as Barbadians. And I find it a dangerous characterization, even though it's something that we say freely. I myself choose not to use it. I don't indict anyone for choosing to use it. But it perpetuates the notion, I think, that somehow politicians in Barbados are in some way to the manor born. I did not fall out of the sky yesterday, sir, and land here in this honorable chamber. And so I do not identify myself as a member of any political class. I asked the people of St. Michael South Central to send me here to do a job, to complete a project. I am working. And I think it's an important distinction that we have to make, because it sends the message that the task is to achieve membership in a class. That's not what the work that we're doing here is about. But there's also another association with political power, and I use that term very loosely because it's not as powerful as you think. There are those, not all, and perhaps, truthfully, not even most, who want us here to complete their own personal wealth agenda. That's what they see as the role of politics and political life. To complete their wealth agenda and no one else's. They see us merely as the administrative arm of their empire. And, you know, as the Honourable Member for St. James Central said before me, it is not about waging any war. But I think that we have to be true to ourselves in speaking to the realities that we have lived over the last few decades. And there are even those without empire who believe that we are here to follow their instructions merely because they believe they occupy a position of supremacy occasioned by their ethnicity, by their shade, by their status. Not all, not even most. But there is that sensibility that reflects itself in the mistrust that people often have for politicians. But sir, that is not why I asked people at St. Michael South Central to send me here to further anybody's wealth agenda. I'm not in that. But what I am concerned with, sir, is to making visible some of the issues that I myself confronted as a young woman growing up in Haggett Hall, going to football in Dash Valley, going to football in the Pine, walking to school to go to Belmont. We are real people who occupy this space, sir. And so this is not about taking on, my mother would say, picking up somebody's fire age. This is our experience. And I feel so pleased to be able to have the opportunity to address these issues with honesty because I feel the country is ready. So there's a notion that calling for greater police accountability means that you don't like the police. Let's be real. There's a notion that if you say, I want to know what happened to that young man who went into that police station on this date, come and tell me what happened. That if you support calls for transparency and investigations into accounts of police brutality, that you're anti-police. That could not be further from the truth. Sir, I think it is actually the opposite. I want the police to be trusted by citizens. Because if the police are trusted by citizens, it makes them more effective at their jobs. And therefore, it makes us all safer. So we need to have a police complaints authority that works, that responds in a timely way. We need to have a culture, a tradition, a practice of if there are questions around any kind of police activity, that those questions can be easily answered with records, with evidence, that we make this business transparent. Because, sir, suspicion and mistrust destroy societies. And while we, as we must, put important resources into making sure that the police have the resources that they're required to do their work, one of the most important resources is a relationship with the community. Back in the early 90s, when we had some increases in violent crime in communities, part of the response had to do with officers developing relationships with their communities, coming to football practice, talking to the guys, talking to the young women, being able to have the community feel that we are on your side and we are working together to keep everybody safe. But it's not just about police, it's about all the institutions of the state. Sir, I as an MP and I as a Minister of Cabinet want us to use every single tool at our disposal to keep me accountable. Because I detest the notion that people who come to serve in political life cannot be trusted. I detest it. Every action, sir, that I have taken over the past 2 years, and that I will ever take, can and always will stand up to scrutiny. But it is not enough for me to know it or for me to say it. I have to show it. We have to show it. And so I promised that I was not going to delve too far into the policies and the programs and the things that we're doing. One of the reasons that we brought integrity and public life legislation first, and that we will complete whatever is required to make sure that people have that confidence, is that we, as a Barbados Labour Party administration, did not want to be associated with that previous decade that had tainted what a politician is. So I have no issue with accountability. I think accountability needs to attach to all state institutions, to all of us in here, to the police, and to anybody who has power over other people. Because that is the real equalizer. Accountability is the real equalizer in any power relationship. And so we have to make sure that it happens. It is also the reason, sir, that we have to take a closer look at how we fund democracy, how we make transparent issues of campaign finance. Because, sir, without transparency, we feed the notion that something dark is going on behind the curtain. And especially after that last decade of 2008 to 2018. So much unaccounted for, so much unexplained. So many examples we saw of wealth already created for a select few, and a concerted effort to keep that wealth concentrated in the hands of those few. After that, the country feels that the wealthy majority is controlling political action. And as long as the economic model of democracy, sir, is one based on large private donations, people are going to feel that way, whether it is true or not. The unfortunate thing about it is that it might cause us to paint all owners of capital with the same broad brush. It ascribes ignoble and nefarious motives to all, when that is simply not the case. There are those, sir, who support campaigns, and I acknowledge that these are not topics that we find comfortable, but if not now, when to speak to these issues. As the old people say, I don't have time put down. And I feel that the country is ready for some of these uncomfortable conversations. There are those who support campaigns, sir, that have no expectation of preference or privilege. In my limited experience, the overwhelming majority, in my experience, they want Barbados to work for all. But as long as we maintain a system of non-declared campaign donations, as long as we insist on decoupling state expenditure from democratic governance, people are going to wonder. Sir, there's a cost to democracy. And I believe that the state should be concerned with funding democracy, because you know why? If there are state appropriations that contribute to the electoral cycle, that have full transparency, then there's less of a suspicion. It is a contribution to accountability and to democracy. And it's not going to happen overnight. The trust that needs to be recreated is not going to happen overnight. And I know it is going to be a controversial issue, but we need to pull back the curtain. Because often, the curtain might be drawn, but there's nothing untoward happening behind it. We have to be willing, as the state, to bear the cost of real, transparent democracy. You know, 2020 has been a year unlike no other. We have seen a pandemic that has reset everything we thought or believed to be true. We have this moment where the entire world, the entire African nation, all over the world, and allies of African people are standing up to say no more. And I think, sir, that Barbados must have a race conversation. I think it has started. They weren't waiting for us. But in order for that conversation to be authentic, those who have privilege that relate to the color of their skin, that relate to the identity of their ancestors, that relate to their inheritance of wealth or status built on the backs of slaves, must recognize their privilege. Sir, I'm not going to enter into any persecution Olympics with anyone or any group in this country. Because the fact is that not everyone is operating from an equal position in this conversation. Some of us just first have to listen. That's all you are required to do right now. In cases where an entire country, an entire civilization is dealing with trauma of centuries, sometimes others of us just have to listen first. And if your country, men and women, in their overwhelming majority, tell you that a statue erected to serve to honor white supremacy disturbs them deeply in their souls, if they tell you that, why would you want to hold on to it? If you are an ally of the equality project with respect to race in your country, why would you want to hold on to it? This notion that it erases history, sir, I wake up with this skin every day in this country. And when I go to different parts of the world, I see the reaction that it gets. I see the reaction that it sometimes gets right here. I don't need a statue to remind me that Barbados was the site of the great slave experiment in this region. Here was where they wanted to create the perfect slave society and then the perfect post-colonial society. There is no possibility of forgetting that. The notion that tourists come from far and wide to look at a statue to white supremacy should make us feel ashamed. Because if we have nothing else, and I'm sure the member for St. James Central would certainly object, if we have nothing else in the way of a tourism product to offer to people, then something is desperately wrong. I don't know too many people who come here, too many guests of mine who say they want to come to Barbados and, oh my goodness, I want to see that gentleman in Hero Square. I've always dreamed of seeing him. The notion that that kind of homage to white supremacy can be equated with historical buildings that still serve a function today, that can be equated with institutions of faith or centers of worship, is a false equivalency. And I promised myself that I was not going to turn my intervention into this particular discussion. But I want to be able to speak to it once only and set it aside. I agree with the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, with the Prime Minister, that the country has to come to terms with what it wants to do. And that we will be guided. That is the model of governance in which I believe. But equally, I cannot understand, just as I cannot understand how you can grow up in a majority black country, 95, 96, 97% black, for your entire life as a white person in this country, and somehow neither you nor your children nor your children's children could count one black friend. And when I use the word apartheid, people think that it is melodramatic. I think that we have to be willing to speak truth to power on these issues. It doesn't mean anybody's making enemies. It doesn't mean that we don't all have non-black associates who are allies. There are many. But we need to have the conversation. Sir, we all know of that very popular song by Bob Marley, War. And in War, he says, we Africans will fight. Now, Emperor Selassie in his speech had said, we Africans will fight if necessary. Bob Marley said in his song, we Africans will fight. We find it necessary. There's a world of difference there. And we know we shall win as we are confident in the victory of good over evil. Like Bob Marley's entire discography, I know every word by heart. Except, sir, I am not as confident in the victory of good over evil. Evil wins all the time. Especially when good women and men do nothing. So I ask the people of St. Michael South Central for their support in coming to this place, sir, to do something. And if you look all through the manifesto of this Barbados Labour Party government, you will see the ways that we committed to do something. I don't have the time, and I don't even wish to go through all of those. I count on my colleagues in this place to help put that thesis. But I do have to mention a few that I feel very strongly about. The truth is that where I sit, where I have the privilege to sit in the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Investment, it really is a privilege for me, because it is a place in which I can be personally associated with the project of completing economic enfranchisement for my generation and for generations to come. I would not have come here if I did not think that these men and women in this chamber were equal to that task and would deliver on that mandate. Because I don't have any aspirations to be in any political class. I don't even know what that is. Sir, the Equity for All Home program is one of the ways of completing what was started under the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act. We still have some work to do in being able to give people title to their land. But in the meantime, we are being outnumbered, sir, by the sheer volume of people who just need affordable housing. And the Equity for All program, sir, is the way in which we provide access to affordable home ownership. 1,400 homes in the first instance. And once we are able to roll that out, we will work to recapitalize to get to 3,000. Because while we say that we've completed the work of putting the things in place to give people a piece of the rock, and now we're focusing on a piece of the action, turns out that we still have to do the work of giving people access to a piece of the rock while we give them access to a piece of the action. We can walk and chew gum. We can consider the place of a statue to white supremacy and whether it should be there or not, and we can continue with our enfranchisement agenda. It is not either or. They're all important projects. The planning obligations that are now a part, sir, of the planning and development legislation is also a part of that enfranchisement and that equalization of wealth and opportunity. Because it gives us the wherewithal, if a development is standing to benefit from the country's patrimony, from the sun and the sea and the sand and the healthful environment and the air and the ambiance, it gives us the wherewithal for developers to be able to give back, to balance the impact of that development by also having another social impact in providing access to land for the housing program that we are embarking on and for other projects. But planning obligations are not just about land. They also provide us for ways, and we've started already with an important hotel development in the city. It also provides us with ways to give people access to an equity stake in the developments, to have people invest so that we can get on with this business of creating intergenerational wealth. It is not enough, we have seen it, to make a couple of people in a home, in a household, to give them jobs, to make them financially independent. It is not enough, because what will happen? Dependency ratios tell us that if there are 5 or 7 or 10 people depending on that income, those people are going to become poor again. Unless you create the wherewithal for people to invest, to create wealth that will stand up for generations of their children, that will really make them economically secure, then we're not doing anything. Sir, we talk about renewable energy and medicinal cannabis projects having to have a certain minimum investment from local business and local operators. And I want to emphasize that we're not in the business of giving people access to grow a bulk commodity. We're not even in the business of focusing on the growing of the bulk commodity. We want to give people access to the companies that will be generated from the value-added production in the medicinal cannabis industry. That is the enfranchisement content of that. And I realize that there must then be a conversation, once we have completed that process of where we place cannabis in the law. I accept that there then must be a conversation that addresses those people who are now sitting in a particular place as the result of a custodial sentence associated with possession of that same cannabis. I accept that that is a conversation that the country wants us to have. It is a valid conversation. Sir, we came here to debate a bill last week, I believe it was, the BOSS scheme. And one of the reasons that we found it important is that it is to give us access to $100 million in capital expenditure to enable us, yes, to get people employed, enable us, yes, to get economic activity, but also to make sure that this scheme is also a part of the economic enfranchisement project. Sir, we found that while we have made flexible the procurement legislation, the access to procurement, we want small businesses to be formed, we want people to start companies and to have access to government procurement. But as was said earlier, this is not always the only gap in people's access. There are all kinds of gaps. There are all kinds of structural reasons why people find that they cannot successfully have access to this procurement. And we know that one of these has to do with the information that people have at their disposal. Simple things. How do you bid for a contract? How do you put together a successful bid? How do you put your company in the place to be able to take a part of this? And if we continue to say, well, it's open for all, like open the door. What happened that you ain't walk through? Look out the door, you realize that the door is open. But somebody's knee is on that person's neck.
You all remember has 2 more minutes.
We have to get down in the weeds, sir, and look at the real reasons why people do not have access. And that's one of the reasons why we are starting a program to actually do a bit of that hand-holding, to find small contractors in their communities and to make sure they have the wherewithal to access these resources. Sir, in my final moments, I will say only this. I realize that this topic is controversial. I realize that it is sensitive. But I could not continue to be who I am, to represent the people who sent me here, if I did not say these things. These things did not become true because I walked in here. For me, these things have always been true. This has been my life. This is the life of the people of St. Michael South Central and many others. And so I support this resolution. I welcome wholeheartedly the conversation. It is time, and it is an opportunity that we will not soon get again to bring about real equality in this country. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to.
Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 2:05.
Until the question is that this honorable chamber be suspended until 5 minutes after 2. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 5 minutes after 2.